home, when your house is being broke into, you want someone to show up and respond, he said. And that's the police. Now, Chief Armstrong, again, said the complaints from Oakland residents about crime, that caused the city council unanimously to vote to restore many of the funding cuts. Okay? In New York City, Mayor de Blasio again. He and the city council reduced the New York City's annual operating budget by $5.6 billion. Okay? They restored $5.2 billion of it. Okay? Now, May 1st through May 23rd in New York City of this year, 531 shootings. That's up from 295. That's 200 over 200 more shootings, 236 more shootings through May 23rd. A little more than 5.5 months, 4.5 months. 336 extra shootings. Now, for the coming fiscal year, Mr. Blasio is proposing to restore about half of last year's monetary cuts. Now, I can go on and on and on and on. But the bottom line is this whole defund the police thing, it's not working. And did anybody ever think it was going to work? Did anybody ever think it was going to work? In Denver, same thing. I mean, defunding the police simply didn't work. Now, why did they do the defunding the police? Well, again, George Floyd, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Incidents where white cops killed black perpetrators. Now, in most all of these cases, not all, but most all, I mean, I'm going to say something here that's going to upset some people. Here's case in point. George Floyd was a criminal. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that the arresting officer needed to kill him. It meant that the arresting officer, pardon me, the arresting officer needed to arrest him, bring him into the police station, have him tried. And if found guilty, pay the price. So over police brutality, let's just call it that. Police brutality is what needs to stop. This whole thing started with the Michael Brown thing. That was really the first thing. And that's in Ferguson, here, not too far from where I live, next door to where I grew up. Okay, that was a big deal. And the whole hands up, don't shoot never happened. Michael Brown wasn't a nice, fine boy. He was a thug. But the bottom line is, he didn't need to be shot. And that whole community of Ferguson, in fact, all the St. Louis area in general, had their jackboot on their necks by the police for generations. These little municipalities would fine them for every little bitty thing. Okay? Many of them received 75% of their revenue from speeding tickets and parking tickets. And basically, you get those from your own community people. So you have a community of poor people who now have a $100 speeding ticket to pay. Okay, here's a guy who makes $300 a week. A third of that needs to go to a dopey speeding ticket. Now, should he have been speeding? No. But because they fleeced the people and treated them poorly, that's where this whole defund the police thing started, okay? Now, here's the silver lining to this dark cloud. 2 different editorials, and I'm going to go ahead and read excerpts from both of them. They were both in the Wall Street Journal, and one was better than the other. But one was by Peggy Noonan, who was a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, and one was by James Carville, who was a speechwriter and advisor for President Bill Clinton. And basically, while they say it in different ways, they're saying, look, this whole defund the police thing, you can't have it, okay? I'm going to go ahead and read these, not verbatim. They're edited because when they start getting political, I took some out. But let's start with Peggy Noonan. Congress and the White House, I'm reading from her editorial in the Wall Street Journal. Congress and the White House are trying to overhaul police practices. Now, by tradition, such efforts are obvious and will likely be overlooked. So here's the obvious. Rising crime in almost every major American city after decades of falling. Police departments are in crisis, battered by changes of abuse, targeted for cuts, Many struggling under recent bail reform laws, officers are demoralized. Now, the New York Post 1 month ago said more than 5,300 New York Police Department uniformed officers retired or put in their papers to leave in 2020. That's a 75% increase from the year before. 75%. In Philadelphia, they're struggling with a shortage of recruits and similar surges in retirements. People don't want to be police anymore, a local chief told the Philadelphia Inquirer. Now, all this happened after America watched the cell phone video of the George Floyd killing about 1 year ago. Now, an incident so horrifying can and will stop America in its tracks, causing nationwide convulsion. That's protests, riots, and burning of businesses. One bad cop can stop a great nation in its tracks. A plumber can't, an accountant can't, a movie star can't. They can't kick America off their axis, but a bad cop can and has. Now, which means police officers are more important than ever. We train them almost as an afterthought. You'd think men and women so crucial to domestic tranquility would be deeply trained and carefully trained, spending years in the police academy. Nope, 4 to 6 months, that's all they get. There are thousands of departments in the U.S., each with its own standards and policing. The LAPD, 6 months of training. Miami, 2. Smaller forces, less. State of California, 664 hours of training. But the San Jose Mercury News last year quoted a criminal justice reform advocate noting that the state requires more training for a cosmetologist than for a police officer. Think about that. In some forces, a high school diploma or even a GED, that's all you need. Okay, some say, you need 2 years of college or military service. But almost all forces offer 4 to 6 months to learn everything, how to use the gear, how to use the radio, body cams, firearms, crowd control, de-escalation situation, deal with the violently mentally ill, talking to citizens in a traffic stop, first aid, the law, uses of force, tactics. 4 to 6 months to learn all that. We ask police to be diplomats, to resolve domestic disputes peacefully. We ask them to have the law at their fingertips and to treat everyone, including the drunk 23-year-old asking for a fight, with respect. And at the same time, we want them to be steely-eyed and sure if someone pulls a gun. We ask them to act proportionately. We ask them to control stray dogs, all the while society's problems escalate, including a mental health crisis and a drug crisis. We're asking them to be a combination of Henry Kissinger, the Dalai Lama, and John Wayne after 4 to 6 months of training. And if they get it innocently wrong, if they misjudge a situation in real time, or if they panic, it's all on a cell phone video. And if they're judged guilty, they lose their jobs, their benefits, their pensions, and their families will be left held vulnerable. Now, instead of doing something when bad things happen, they feel the temptation to do nothing, stay in the car and turn away from trouble. And street criminals know this. They're not that stupid. They're calculating, constantly judging who has the upper hand. They know that we are entering a golden age of street crime, with local laws relaxed, systems changed, judges deactivated, and streets full of guns and cops on the defense. Few are saying defund the police anymore. Few in charge. Okay? And that doesn't poll well. Defund the police. Instead, they're playing verbal games like redirect resources, which means funnel money away from the police towards whatever programs they dream up to be part of solving the problem. Now, the head of New York's Police Benevolent Association told the New York Post, that he saw in this a strategy. Abolition through attrition. Get rid of the police by denying them what they need. Considering their importance, we are underfunding the police. They need to increase recruitments, train new cops longer and deeper, and retrain the veterans properly to keep up with the changes in the law and the equipment. And that costs money. And it goes on and on and on, okay? Basically, Peggy Noonan says we're putting it all on the frail shoulders of the guy. And it's a generational thing too, okay? This generation, the younger people are different, okay? I'm not saying in a bad way or a good way, but they're different. Again, this may be the old man in me talking. But we're putting it all on the frail shoulders of the guy who was born in 2000 and spent visitation with his father playing Call of Duty and World of Warcraft, and the girl whose father came from a chaotic home. They're the Academy's new recruits. Now, we're lucky to have them, but our culture hasn't given the young class enough clues, enough guidance on how to be in the world. For instance, and this is, according to Peggy Noonan, this is hilariously small, but not really small. We haven't done a good job in teaching what used to be called manners. It hardly matters if a kid at Harvard who's going to be a hedge fund lout, he lacks sympathy. That's almost expected. But cops need kindness and dignity to do their tense and sensitive work, to defuse situations. To live in the world of criminals is to live in the world of male pride, and this is a sensitive place. Now, here's the thing. If we give police the training and resources they need, things will be good. If not, we can expect the crime rate to rise for another 5 or 10 years or longer. Those are the two options. That was Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal. Again, I paraphrased because some of it got political and I wanted to cut that out. James Carville, same thing. Here's James Carville's editorial in the Wall Street Journal. From 1993 to 2019, crime steadily decreased in the United States. Every president since Bill Clinton inherited a declining crime rate and left office with a further decline in the crime rate until Donald Trump came along. During Trump's final year in office, violent crimes and homicides spiked. That's getting political too, because I think that spike had nothing to do with Donald Trump. But what Carville does have to say is crime is going to be an issue up and down the ballot in 2022. And many local politicians are already feeling the heat. Now the violent crime rate is on the rise, and Democrats can no longer afford to sit by passively. If we don't aggressively begin to own the crime issue and make Republicans respond to their own failures, we risk losing the slim majorities in Congress. This modern Democratic Party is flat out better on crime than the Republicans, according to Carville. Now it's time for the Democrat consulting class to stop its bedwetting on this issue and take this case to the American people. That is huge, okay? Now, Carville says crime flourishes in the streets as well as in the suites. Murder rates shot up 26% and mass shootings spiked as well. That's according to the FBI. So Carville also quotes the FBI. Hate crimes spiked by more than 20% recently, okay? Now, Carville says this, Democrats, listen up. When it comes to crime, don't pivot. Don't take it off the table. Hold Mr. Trump and the Republicans accountable. Make them own the crime wave they created. Democrats shouldn't stop at police reform. We need to get the whole job done. Reform the police and clean up the Trump crime wave. Carville then goes on to say, I love my party. I'm a proud Democrat. There are many good policies to reduce crime and reform the police at the same time. After the release of the revolting footage showing the 2019 death in police custody of Ronald Green in Louisiana, it's as urgent as ever that we pass sweeping criminal justice reforms, starting with the bill being discussed by Senators Tim Scott and Cory Booker and Representative Karen Bass. But we probably can't usher in the sweeping reforms needed if Democrats don't have big majorities. And we can't win big majorities unless we go on the offensive against cheap talk of the Republican Party. All too often, our consulting class and political operatives are insecure in confronting the tough issues, and they're scared to pursue the winning strategy. Those who are rightly intent on police reform shouldn't shy away from holding Republicans accountable. Democrats, don't pivot on crime. Own the issue, or the issue will own you. Now, much of that is very political, whereas Carville blames Trump and the Republicans for the increase in crime. Trump and the Republicans have nothing to do with the increase in crime. The increase in crime came from cutting funds in the city, defunding the police, which was also caused by police, some police